Okay, let's make a start. Welcome to episode 1 of the Sunday Workout Podcast. I'm going to be your host today. My name's Gareth James. And just to fill you in about what we're going to be doing today. Today is the first of what I hope will be many vodcasts live on Twitch on a Sunday afternoon, 4 o'clock GMT. So if you're seeing this, then you're tuned in and you know to be here. But if you're watching this at a later date, then you know to check out this stream at 4 o'clock every Sunday. What we're going to be doing is going through various questions about MTTs. So that might be a few hand history examples. It might be some just some general questions as well. So without further ado, let's go into this. Okay, let's get rid of this. Okay, so I've got a list of questions up here. Let me just see, just make sure I have them all loaded off on another table. Okay, so we've got the hands loaded into Universal Replayer, and I'm hoping that you can see this okay. So we'll just go with that. There's some strange sound going on at the moment, so let's just check out what's going on there. That's rather strange. I've got everything muted. Rather strange. I've got everything. Okay, we might have some sort of feedback problem going on at the moment, but hopefully it will sort itself out. If there's still problems with the sound, if you can still hear music playing, then let me know. Yeah, it looks like there's some sort of feedback at the moment, so I'm not really sure what the issue is. But yeah, Jason said Twitch stream back. So like feedback of some. Yeah, it looks like there's some sort of feedback at the moment, so I'm not. So I've muted the sound on my end, so I'm hoping that that's going to fix it. I'll carry on, and if there's still problems, then just let me know. There's always going to be some technical issues, aren't there, on the first time you do anything like this? So we'll just we'll go into it. So this first question then comes from Martin. He's from the UK, I believe, and he's asking about the king-queen hand. So let's try and okay. Here's the king-queen hand. Okay, and let's go through it. So his question is: should we call the river? Should he raise the hand on the flop or the turn? Okay. So I mean, let's think about our first decision here. This player who has a similar size stack to ours decides to min raise, and we're on the in the big blind with king queen. So we could think about 3-betting here as well as flat calling. I think that if we're going to 3-bet, we'd want to believe that we have a much stronger hand than our opponent. And that we can get a lot of value post flop. So I think calling here is pretty reasonable. Given that we are sort of over 40 big blinds deep as well, you've got to think about how many hands that you would 3-bet here that you could then play against a 4-bet. And obviously, if that's if it's a pretty tight range of hands that you can continue versus a 4-bet, then your opponent will be able to take advantage of that. So it makes more sense to flat call here or to 3-bet your value hands. So I think the flat call is absolutely fine. Flop comes king 10-10. Player original raiser goes ahead and bets. It's a pretty small bet, to be honest. He could be doing this with a 10, trying to induce action. I don't think he would go this small with a king. He could possibly think about weaker kings. So that's that is a possibility. It could also be a hand like Queen Jack or Ace Jack or Ace Queen with some sort of gut shot where he doesn't need to actually bet too big at all. So I think we should definitely go ahead and call. On the turn, I think we've got two options. I guess we could lead here on the turn, but here I decided to check. And again, it's a pretty small bet. I think if this player now has a value hand, that he's going to go ahead and bet slightly bigger, because he'd want to get value from your weaker kings. If he has a 10, he wants to get value from any king. And he wants to charge the most for your draws. So I would imagine that he has a pretty weak hand here. But I probably wouldn't go ahead and raise. I think I'd probably just try and keep the pot small at this stage. If you raise, you've got to think about the hands that you get value from. Still get value from King Jack and King 9, those sorts of hands. But I think calling is absolutely fine. 3 comes off on the river. So thinking about draws that he may well have bet in this way, I guess some club draws have missed. The Queen Jack or the Ace Jack or the Ace Queen has missed as well. So we could definitely check to call here. We do block the King X of clubs, so we know it's not. He doesn't have Ace King of clubs, King Queen of clubs, King Jack of clubs, something like that. So you are looking more towards, I guess, Ace Queen of clubs, Ace Jack of clubs, things like that. That could definitely go ahead and bet here if we check. So this will be, I guess, opponent dependent. And so, I mean, just thinking about this, if you think that he's going to be bluffing quite a lot on this river, then I like a check call line. If you, I mean, it's difficult to think about the kind of hands that you could get value from by leading this river. The thing is that, you know, from your point of view, if you did have a draw, they've all missed. So he may well look you up a little bit lighter with some sort of second best hand, you know, something like jacks or queens. But we don't even know that this player is going to bet those hands on the flop. So I think I'll probably just go ahead and check. And he bets. This is the biggest bet he's made so far, and it does kind of look value-y, but I think we're too high up in our range to fold here. So yeah, we have to call here. If he has Ace King or a 10, then, you know, so be it. But I think if he had a strong hand here, he would have bet bigger on the turn, and it would have allowed him to bet bigger on the river as well. Okay, yeah. So Magic Clown was saying, yeah, the problem was the bigger river bet. So I guess I'm kind of guessing here that Magic Clown might be Martin who sent the question in, which is great. So yeah, slightly bigger bet. As I said before, I think we still have to go ahead and call because we're too high up in our range. I guess if we could think about folding some very very weak King X hands, but I think King Queens is going to be too strong. We're still ahead of King Jack and King 9, King 8 suited that he might have opened from here, plus all of his bluffs as well. So I'm happy to call here. And he does show up with Miss Flush. So his line is okay, actually. I think that, I mean, the turn card does give him additional outs and additional equity, but it doesn't really change much. So he's not going to expect to get a lot of folds on this turn card. So that's the only reason I wouldn't choose to bet the turn. But given that generally you're just going to call on the turn, then he gets to set the price for the river as well. So Magic Clown is saying people do this; they bet small, and big with strong hands. Yeah, I think that's definitely true. But I think your hand is just a little bit too strong at this point. I think you've under-repped your hand as well. So yeah, I like the way you played this hand. I think his line tends to be quite bluffy here, because you think about it, what sort of value hands are going to be taking this line? I guess aces, Ace King, those are the hands to be, like 10x as well. But don't you think he would bet a little bit bigger on the turn? I think he probably would, given the fact that there's still like 30 big blinds behind by the time the river bet goes in. I think he probably would have wanted to get more value in that spot. So it's a great first hand to go through. I'll just give you a few seconds just to type any questions in you have about that analysis. Just let me know, and I'll do my best to answer them. If not, we'll go on to the next question. I'll have a quick drink. We're all good. Okay, let's move on. So Martin sent in a couple of other hands as well, so we'll try and get back to them. Let's move on to this next hand. Okay, so this hand is sent in from or by Jason from the UK as well, and let's have a look. It's looks to be like a $1 rebuy tournament from, I believe, is it Jason Somerville's home game? So Jay Carver Poker's home game could be. That's the indication I'm getting at the moment. So there's some sort of backstory here, so I'll just give you the quick rundown on that. He's level 12, about 35 minutes in, of a 2x Hyper Turbo 6 max, 1000 starting chips, 3-minute blinds. There are rebuys and add-ons. Oh, sorry, the rebuys and add-ons have closed. Jason saying, then, yeah, it is the Jay Carver Poker home game. Excellent. You always intended just to play one buy-in only. All right, which maybe we will talk about later on. With something like a Hyper Turbo, it's going to be quite difficult to progress far when the blinds are going up so fast, and you only start with 1,000 chips. I do think sometimes in rebuy tournaments you can get away with just the single buy-in, but you do put yourself at a disadvantage against other players who have obviously just bought themselves more chips. But it's something to consider as well, is that if you only buy in once, then they have to, and they're buying it twice, then they're padding the prize pool for you. So I think your ROI is probably going to be significantly bigger if you just take one buy-in. But with a Hyper Turbo, I think it's going to be quite difficult. But if you've taken this approach, you just can play it once. And also later on in the tournament, it doesn't make sense to rebuy to 1,000 chips if the blinds are like 200, 400 like they are here. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to rebuy to 2.5 big blinds. So let's go into this then. You always intended to play this as one buy-in, and then you're up to about 4,500 off your original starting stack of 1,000. Blinds are currently 200, 400, as we can see, with a 50 ante, likely increase to 300, 600 with a 75 ante before the next big blind in 3 hands, dropping your stack from 11 bigs as it is now to about 7.5. There are currently 500 players remaining with 114 paid, ranging from $7.68 to $773. So a long way from the money. And you've seen 10 hands at this table with 4 flops shown, one of which from someone anteed all in. Table is on a slightly loose aggressive side from appearances. You're the shortest stack at the table. And the question then, given the position in the tournament, the impending blind increases, was this shove sensible or too ambitious? Okay, so it is a 6 max tournament, and Hero decides to go ahead and shove from the cutoff. Taking a first glance at this, I think the shove is absolutely fine. You said that in hindsight, it says the percentages in hindsight show that you're actually a favourite 3-handed, but you can't be results oriented. Yeah, I wouldn't be results oriented. It's likely here that you're going to be called by a better hand if you do get called. So when you get called, it's likely by a better hand, and that will probably include pairs and some better ace-x type of hands, like ace-10, ace-jack, ace-queen, ace-king, maybe some king-queens in there as well. So those sorts of hands. So when we do get called, we are probably quite far behind. But that's only when we do get called. Most of the time, the players here are going to fold, and you're going to pick up how much is it? 900 chips, which is about 20% of your stack. So that's really, really worth having at this stage. So I think the shove here is absolutely fine. If you do get called behind, which I guess you do, given that you're talking about being 3-handed and being a favourite and things like that, then I think they are going to be big hands, and that's what we've got to expect. That most of the time, what you're relying on here is fold equity, getting your opponents to fold in this situation, and then If they do call you, then you still have probably about 30% equity, maybe 35% equity against their calling range. So together, hand equity and fold equity is going to be on your side. Okay, so I mean, we can have a look to see what happened. It's probably worth thinking actually what other hands we'd shove here. I think we're looking at suited connectors, probably down to 8-7 suited, maybe 7-6 suited. Probably any ace from this position, any Broadway hand, and probably any pair as well. Yeah, I'd probably go with that range. So I'll give you a few seconds to let me know what you think about that range. But yeah, I mean, we can have a look at this, see what happens. So you run into 2 ace kings. Like we said, yeah, you are likely to get called. If you do get called, it's likely by a better hand. So that's what happens. Just one of those things. It's unlucky in this spot to run into 2 big hands. But you know, you had a chance to triple up in that hand, so it wasn't all bad. So I'll give you a few seconds to ask any questions about that spot, and then we'll move on to a different one. Are we all good? No questions? Jason's saying there, nope, it sounds good. Thanks for the review. No worries. Thank you for sending in the hand. Okay, this next this next question is sent in from Kristen in the USA. And she says that she plays in a weekly tournament at a local casino where the play is just horrendous. The structure is horrible with 20-minute levels, and it's very unlikely to get pots heads up. How do I beat this tournament when I believe I'm so much better than the rest of the field, but it just seems to come down to luck? Well, the easy answer here is if the structure is terrible, horrible, and just downright horrendous, then maybe don't play it. There are tournaments available where the structure is far better, but that's a bit of a sort of cop-out answer. So I would say in these situations where the play is pretty bad, they tend to play quite passively. So it means that value betting is going to be much more important. You probably need to be aware that if you are value betting and then suddenly your passive opponents comes out raising on any street, then your one pair type of hands go down significantly in value. So you probably don't want to be continuing with a one pair hand facing significant action, especially on the turn or the river, because these passive opponents, they love to call. So if they suddenly come out raising, if they check raise the river, it's more likely to be a hand that will beat one pair type hand. Other things to consider then, if the blinds are going up really quickly, you need to be really confident with your short stack game. So it might mean that you need to start shoving a little bit earlier. So you can shove with 15 or even up to 20 big blinds with certain hands. And examples of that might be small pocket pairs. If it folds to you, let's say in the cutoff with pocket fours, and you have 19 big blinds, shall we say, then you don't really want to be raising to induce with that hand. You just want to go ahead and shove it in the first place. You just want to deny your opponents an opportunity to shove over the top, and also to just flat call, because if they are doing a lot of flatting, you don't want to get yourself into a situation where that happens. So always thinking about hands that you can raise to induce with. So you might raise to induce with pocket 8s or 9s, but with pocket 2s or 3s or smaller pocket pairs, then they're probably not good enough to induce. Therefore, you just go ahead and shove them. I think you can raise fold against some weaker players as well with some pretty crappy marginal hands. So you might want to think about that. But if they are flatting a lot even off short stacks, then that won't make a lot of sense. But if everyone's playing pretty short, then you might have a bit of fold equity if you are 2xing, 2.2xing, even 2.5xing with short stacks. And I wouldn't be too worried about raise folding even down to 11, 12 big blinds, because if the structure is that bad, I would imagine that most of the players are going to be playing like a 7 big blind stack and 9 big blind stack. There's going to be lots of short stacks around the table. So even with like 6 big blinds, you're going to have some fold equity on your shoves. So I recommend experimenting with raise folding, experimenting with shoving for more chips, so that you can stay ahead of the average stack and stay ahead of the rest of the field, and also just being really comfortable with your short stack game as well. Just as an aside as well, when it comes to value betting, I think it makes sense to value bet bigger when the stacks are larger right at the start, and as the stacks get shorter, your C bets can be much smaller because you don't need to bet as much to get the stacks in by the river. So hopefully that helped. Let's see the next question, unless anyone has a point on that. We're all good. Okay, let's move through. Okay, so we've got another question here. The question is, I'm kind of new to HUDs and I'm wondering what stats I should include and what they mean. I'm a bit confused about VPIP and RFI and PFR and that I've seen on other HUDs. And also, what are the options for software? What are the pros and cons of HUDs, etc., etc. Okay, so pretty big question here. We could probably talk about a HUD for quite a few days. What I'll do, let's just see if I have access. Okay, so I've got Poker Tracker here open. So let's just bring this in. So hopefully you can see this, and we'll just have a look at these stats that I use on Poker Tracker. I also use Hold'em Manager as well. So to answer your first question, or one of your questions, what are the options for software? There's quite a few options, but the main ones are Hold'em Manager and Poker Tracker, and they're actually owned by the same company now. So some great things are going to happen, I'm sure, when they decide to put all the fantastic features together in some way, if that's what they choose to do. But they generally do the same thing. There isn't a version of Hold'em Manager for Mac, which is why I've got Poker Tracker here on my Mac, but when I do play on Windows, I tend to use Hold'em Manager. There is a nice function in Hold'em Manager you have versus a hero stat. So every stat you can see how your opponent plays against you specifically, whereas I don't think you can do that on Poker Tracker. At least I haven't seen a way of doing that. So let's go into it. Let me just say that as well, you do have to buy the Poker Tracker and Hold'em Manager if you want to use it. There are some options, I think, of free software, or it might be just cheaper software, but I'm not massively familiar with those at the moment. I would just recommend Hold'em Manager or Poker Tracker if you are serious about using a HUD and serious about developing your poker game. So here, let me just run through some of these stats then. So I've got the shortened version of the name. I like to have this here because when you get a table change, you want to be sure that this stat matches up to the player that the stats are above or below, depending on where you choose to position your HUD. And just in case you wanted to know what HUD stands for, it's heads-up display. So it just displays all of these different stats for the stats that you want to choose to use. So anyway, yeah, I use this one, the shortened name, just so I can be sure it's that person's stats. I've seen some training videos where that name isn't there, and then they've gone to look at the stats and they're telling you all about, oh, this person's got a VPIP of this and PFR, and they're acting upon these stats. And then when they do this, the player is actually someone else and not the one they're talking about. So I never wanted to do that. I don't want you guys to do that either. So it's worth having the abbreviated name in there. Then I've got stack size next to that. So just in big blinds, I like to work in big blinds when I'm thinking about most of my decisions. We might get onto something called true big blinds later on. And you could have the M value in there as well, which is your stack size divided by the size of the pot pre-flop. But I just like to use big blinds, just makes my life easier. And this is how I like to think about poker strategy in terms of big blinds. So worth considering that when the blinds go up, this number will be wrong for one hand. So that's when you should ignore it when the blinds have gone up. So it's always worth just glancing quickly at the stack size and glancing quickly at the number of chips in your stack to make sure that it's correct. But that does only happen once the blinds go up. I've got aggression factor, so it tells you how aggressive your opponent is. If this is a small number, anything below 1, they're going to be a very passive player, so they like to call too much. And anything sort of two or more, it's going to be pretty aggressive. They like to bet and raise rather than call. This next number is aggression frequency, and this is how often someone tends to take an aggressive action rather than a passive action. And then I've got hands, number of hands on our opponents, and I really like this one, this stat. I think it's really, really important because there are certain stats that we have on our HUD that are just no good over a very small sample. So you can see that there's 280 hands here. It's actually on me, but I mean, we'll have a look. It's got 78 hands on this guy, 55, 349 we've got on this guy. So the more hands that you have on your opponent, the better you probably, the more you can trust the stats. So you can see here we've got 504 hands on this guy, and I would trust these stats a lot more than, let's see, this guy who's played we only have 34 hands on him. Okay, and this guy 11 hands. So you might look down at this guy's stats, 36, 36. We'll come on to that in a minute, but that basically, this is a pretty loose player. A player that likes to raise rather than call, and but it's actually only over 11 hands, so it probably means they've raised like 3 or 4 hands, and that's it out of 11. And over an 11 hand sample, I'm sure we've all had 3 decent hands that we can go ahead and raise, so it doesn't really count for much. We can't think that this guy is raising a wider than normal range just yet. Okay. So let's go on to VPIP and PFR then. So VPIP is how often you voluntarily put money into the pot. So it includes the times when you decide to limp pre-flop or call a raise. It doesn't include the times when you're in the big blind. If this number is quite high, then you can see that your opponent likes to play a lot of hands and see a lot of flops. But then we need to look at it in conjunction with this next number, which is pre-flop raise, and this is how often your opponent is raising pre-flop. And if there's a pretty small gap between the VPIP and the PFR, this tends to be a more competent player. If there's a pretty big gap, then that will tend to be a more fishy player, someone that likes to call more often than they choose to raise. Let's see if we can find anybody. Everyone here seems to be pretty... Okay, yeah, so this guy, all right, so immediately he jumps out as having a big gap between his VPIP and his PFR, which means that he's just calling or limping too much, and a lot more often than he's choosing to raise. Okay, hopefully all this is making sense. If there's anything that you want me to run through, then just write some questions in the chat and I can be sure to go through it. 3-bet percentage is how often a person makes a re-raise pre-flop. Okay, so if you choose to call pre-flop, that's going to be a 1-bet. If you choose to raise pre-flop, that's going to be a 2-bet, and if you choose to re-raise pre-flop, that's going to be a 3-bet. So this is how often the person is 3-betting. So it gives you an idea if someone is just 3-betting their value hands, or if they're starting to 3-bet some semi-bluffs as well. So this guy 3-bets 7%, compared to me, bets 15% in this tournament. 7%, 5%. So any number is pretty small. You can more often than not think that they're 3-betting with a strong range. Whereas if you saw the 3-bet at 15% over 280 hands, then you can start to think that this opponent is starting to re-raise with some weaker hands as well. And we've got fold to 3-bet as well. So if this is pretty high, then you can go ahead and re-raise your opponent pre-flop quite liberally. If it's low, then you need to work out whether or not this is an opponent that likes to call those 3-bets out of position, or goes ahead some 4-bets. And you probably don't want to be making light 3-bets against players that like to 4-bet a lot, because you're going to be put under quite a lot of pressure. I don't want to go too deeply into these stats, so we'll just continue pretty quickly. Then I've got cold call, so it's call 2-bet, but it's like cold call a raise pre-flop, and that's 8%. It just gives you an idea of the range of hands that your opponents are calling with. So you can see these pretty tight opponents are calling with pretty small numbers. Whereas this guy's cold call is much bigger than everyone else's, and we got that already from the VPIP and PFR as well. Then we've got steal percentage, how often someone's raising from the cutoff, the button, or the small blind. And you'd expect a good player to have starting to get a higher number in this of this stat. Fold small blind to steal, how often they fold from the small blind. So it's important when you're trying to steal to see if your opponent is going to give up. And then how often someone folds from the big blind as well. And if these two numbers are pretty high, then you can go ahead and steal pretty liberally. Next one is fold big blind to small blind steal. So good to know if your opponent is going to give up blind versus blind. And then how often someone's 3-betting your steal. So the re-steal, basically. I mean, we can have a quick look. Where's our guy with 500 hands? So this guy's 3-betting the re-steal 31%, which looks to be pretty high. But then we see it's only over 29 hands, and 29 hands is a pretty small sample. So even though we have 500 hands on this guy, his 3-bet steal stat is only over 29 hands. So we're starting to get a good picture of this guy, but VPIP and PFR are going to converge much quicker than 3-bet steal because it happens much more often. You can see here this player has played 502 hands. Where they can voluntarily put money in the pot, and they've played 86 of those hands. In the raise, they've had 497 opportunities to raise, and they've taken 68 of them. So hopefully all of that makes sense. C-bet percentage, how often someone raises pre-flop and then continues by betting on the flop. Turn C-bet, how often they continue to bet on the turn. And then the sort of flip side of those stats, fold to C-bet, so how often someone is folding pre-flop after calling pre-flop. How often they're folding on the flop if they call pre-flop, and the same again on the turn. And then I like to have these position stats as well. It gives me an idea of who's positionally aware. So you can see that these are my stats, and I opened 16% in this tournament, 16% from early position, 11% from middle position, 10% from the cutoff, 40% from the button, and 86% from the small blind. So you can see that the button and small blind are my favorite steal spots within this tournament, and you can see that only 10% from the cutoff means that I'm probably not stealing enough from the cutoff. So I'd probably want to address that at some point as well. But again, if I decided to raise them from the cutoff over a large sample and someone could see that, then they'd probably give me a little bit more credit as well. So I've gone through all of those. I'm going to give you a few seconds again. I'm just going to grab a drink. If there's anything you want me to go through on that about the HUD, then we can. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question. I'll move this out of the way. Okay, we're good for questions. I don't know if that means that I'm answering and telling you good stuff and answering it well, or everyone's falling asleep, but hopefully it's the former. Jason saying then that was a useful explanation, easy to get lost in the details. Okay. I am recording this this vodcast, so if there's anything you did miss, you can go ahead and watch it again at a later date. I'm probably going to upload it to YouTube for you to have a watch, so watch this space for that. Right, let's go back to the questions then. Let's see how we're doing for time as well. We can go for about 38 minutes, so I think we've got time for another couple of questions. Oh, this was a good one. So another one from Martin was an ace-king hand. Okay, so question is, we've got ace-king suited here. Martin decided to cold call 3-bet only, call the 3-bet only pre-flop because the villain who 3-bet was quite passive. Is your call on the flop okay? I think it was fine. And can we fold here at all? Okay, sounds like an interesting hand. So let's see what happened. Okay, so we get a couple of limps in early position. So you're probably really excited with ace-king suited, seeing that. How many bigs do we have at the start of the hand? 430, 60 bigs, roughly, 62, something like that. And this player then decides to go ahead and isolate. So it's not, I mean, just to be awkward and pernickety, obviously it's not a 3-bet, it's just an isolation raise. So in that sense, I'd probably go ahead and I want to feel like going ahead and 3-betting. But if you felt this player was pretty tight, then I can understand why you chose to go ahead and flat. If you think this guy might have ace queen, ace jack in his range, then we don't want to scare that hand away. So calling pre-flop works well. If we had ace king offsuit, I'd probably be more likely to go ahead and 3-bet, because the most likely hand that we're going to hit with ace king is top pair, and it's just a 1-pair type hand, and a 1-pair type hand doesn't play well if this flop ends up going multi-way. But with a hand like ace king suited, I can see calling here being fine. But almost like we're playing like for top pair value, but also with the option of the nut flush as well, or the nut flush draw. Other things to consider as well. Well, like I've already said, that this has the potential to go multi-way. Okay, well, we get called by first limper and the second limper. That seems pretty terrible. So we've gone 4 ways to the flop. We're not going to feel massively confident if we hit an ace or a king. But given the fact that there's only just over 2 times the pot left in our stack, then we're probably not going to be able to fold if we do hit an ace or a king. We flop 2 overs and the flush draw. And this guy just comes out and fires. Okay. Let's just see what happens. And this guy goes ahead and shoves. So your question was, is your call on the flop okay? You think it was fine. Can we fold here at all? The real benefit from a hand, such a strong draw like this with the nut flush draw, is where we have fold equity on our side as well. And hand equity and fold equity together are really powerful. Here we just have hand equity. And you can see up here it says, right, we need 35.9% equity to break even on a call here. Okay, so the best case scenario, I guess, in this spot is that Eddie Sheary is deciding to bet pot and half his stack with a worse flush draw, as is Bosgore 13. I think that's pretty unlikely. Let's see if we can bring in Equilab to give some more realistic ranges. The one thing I'd like to say at this stage is no one, not even like the best players in the world, could tell you exactly the range of hands that Eddie Sheary is deciding to play like this. You've probably got a better idea of the way Bosgore is playing this hand, because he's seen a big bet. So I'd imagine he's doing this with overpairs most often. I think a set could go ahead and just smooth call. So but his most likely set is going to be pocket 10. So yeah, I think he's probably just going to go ahead and smooth call with top set. I don't think he's going to isolate with 6s or 4s pre-flop. It's unlikely he has 10-6 suited or 10-4 suited. So I think this is probably just going to be a pretty big hand, like jacks plus. I don't think it's going to be ace king either. I mean, we do block ace king, and also against a pot size bet into 3 other players, I don't think the original raiser can expect this guy to be folding much. So I'd imagine, I'm going to say Bosgore has something like jacks plus making this raise. Eddie Sheary's a different proposition. I mean, we do have to factor him in, but it's probably worth just seeing how we're doing equity-wise just against one player. I'm going to say probably factor him in. We definitely need to factor him in, but let's see how we're doing. Okay, so it's basically a coin toss, and that's great in that sense, because we only need 35.9% equity. We are getting against that range, which is pretty strong. We're actually getting 49.53% equity, which is good. I mean, let's just think about real examples. Let's just say he has aces, then we're still getting the right odds, but obviously we're only drawing then to our diamonds, as opposed to if he had queens, then we have 2 overs and the flush draw instead. Okay, so let's go back to jacks. Mad Clown saying yes, that's what I thought he had. He had an overpair. Was not sure about the other one. Okay, so in the heads up pot, we work out that we are getting the right odds, but I just want to throw something out here. I'm just going to move this out of the way. If you call here, you only have one way to win the hand, and that's by having the best hand at showdown. So sometimes you might work out that you have the right amount of equity. So let's say you have 30. Let's say we had 36% equity in this hand. Basically, what you're saying is that 64% of the time you're going to lose this pot. And I never like to get myself into a spot, even though it means, even in a spot like this where we could, significantly increase our stack. I never like to call when we're getting such lousy odds. So it's worth considering how, what our equity is and how often we actually win the hand. So it's not always, I don't think it's always worth going with pot odds when it comes to calls. And this is why I was saying that fold equity and hand equity together is really, really powerful. But calling shoves really isn't. It's essentially a coin toss, isn't it? You can forget these numbers for a minute because this guy in this particular spot doesn't have jacks, queens, kings, or aces as a whole range. He has one of those hands and just one of those hands. So it's pretty difficult to say exactly. And I know when we do range analysis and things like that, we need to make these calculations. But I think that it's far more powerful and far better to do it when we are able to put the last aggressive move in and put some pressure on our opponents. So if this hand played out differently, if Eddie Sheery checked, Emma for you checked, Bosco decided to bet, then we could go ahead and raise or shove and have fold equity against 2 opponents and also hand equity. So even if this guy turns up with a big hand, we still have some outs against him. But here we're just tossing a coin as to whether or not we can get pretty much a triple up. And I know you're thinking, okay, well, to get a triple up, he's 1 in 3, but we're getting better than those odds. We haven't even factored in the other guy yet. So let's say he's playing 10-9 suited in this way. How does that affect our equity? Well, our equity is looking pretty good still. Okay, let's say that he's taking away some of our diamond outs. They decided to bet like this. Okay, we're still getting the right odds to make this call in terms of just based on equity, but we are still going to lose this hand 58% of the time, 58% of the time. So it depends. Do you want to get yourself into that spot? Let's go worst case scenario that this guy, I don't think he has 10s, but let's say he decides to bet this way with 6s. You can see then that our equity significantly drops. And if we were going to include, let's just say this guy did decide to have 10s, then you're going to see that still, our equity is really quite bad. So I put 10s plus in that spot. So you can see that this time we win the hand a quarter of the time, we lose it 3/4 of the time. So I'm just trying to ignore these pot odds at the moment because I think it makes more sense to think about how often we're going to win this hand and how often we're going to lose it, just in a general sense. So I think calling here is okay. I mean, we probably just have to go ahead and give this guy some reasonable hands. So I guess ace 10, king 10, queen 10, jack 10, 10, 9. We've got some diamond draws as well in there. I guess he could have something like 7-5 suited for the open-ended straight draw. I think it's unlikely he has a gut shot for donk betting this much, and probably this straight draws, that's probably unrealistic or optimistic on our part. I guess he could have a hand 7-6 of diamonds maybe. So the second pair plus a draw. Let's see how we're doing against that range. We're actually doing okay. We've got the right amount of odds. So I think you'll agree that the biggest and most difficult part of this analysis is that it can be quite tricky to know exactly what your opponent is making this play with. So we've worked out that against an overpair here of jacks plus, then we have enough equity to get this hand in. We have a good chance to almost triple up, which is pretty important. My concern really is about the player that decided to donk bet in this spot and donk bet for pot. So we have very little fold equity in this hand. So in game, I mean, I think I'd probably do exactly what you chose to do. So I'm seeing a red blob here, so I'm guessing you decided to call. Yeah, I'd probably do exactly the same. But my situation, my decision overall might change depending on how close we were to a final table and if this was a final table. And the reason for that is I don't really want to risk a coin toss. You know, and it's a coin toss at best. We could be really far behind 2 sets in this spot, and then we're absolutely crushed. I wouldn't want to risk it on a coin toss at this stage of the tournament. When let's say I'm looking around and I see that this is a final table, and I've got 14k behind, and this guy's got 4k and 4k and 4.5k. I don't think it makes sense to get stacks in at this point. Mad Clown is saying was not even close to the money. Yeah, so if you're, let's say you need 1 million chips to win this tournament, then it makes sense to go with the hand here. We've seen that the calling here is absolutely fine against the range that we gave our opponents. But this is the thing when we're thinking about range, is that their exact hand is included within that range, but in this exact spot they only have one hand. And I know that might come as a surprise to some people listening to this, that we always got to think in terms of range, and I do think that's important. But it's actually impossible for us to say exactly what our opponent's range is. What exact hands is this guy making this play with? It's really, really difficult to know. So if you were ever in doubt, if you ever weren't sure in a similar situation to this, I would just go ahead and fold, even though you've got 2 overs and the nut flush draw. I think you could just go ahead and fold. But if you feeling a bit more gambly and you know that there's significant way to the final table, or the money in general, then go ahead and call. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Let me know what you think about the analysis on there. See if there's anything that maybe you hadn't heard before that you thought that was interesting. Let's see. I think we'll just go with one more hand. I'm trying to look at the time. Yeah, so we've got 8 minutes left. I wanted to wrap things up within an hour, really. So we've got, on the recorder it says 8 minutes. We've got 5, yeah, let's say sort of 5 or 10 minutes left here. So let's go with one more hand from someone else. Let's have a look. Okay, let's just see. Mad Clown then is saying, yes, makes sense, thanks. I was quite happy to take the flip at that point. Okay, so I think that's absolutely fine. But my main point here is that just because you're getting the right odds to call, then it doesn't mean that you have to call, because pot odds can be quite deceiving in the sense that let's say you are, like I said before, you're getting 36% equity. Okay, well, you've got a 0.1% edge. You want to take that edge, but you're still going to lose 64% of the time. Like, I never really want to get myself into a spot when that could potentially happen. So that's just the way I play and teach poker. You've got to go with what you feel most confident with at the end of the day. Right, let's. So Martin sent in one more question actually, so we could go with that. Let's have a look. Seeing as he's here and he's turned up, so let's go with that. So decides to raise with pocket eights. Let's look at the question first. Is this shove on the flop reasonable? The villain was quite a solid player. He didn't have many reads. Thought he would only raise this flop with sets or draws. Since draws are more likely, I decided that I have the best hand. I did not think that he would call with a draw if I shove. Okay, let's have a look, see what happens. So the big blind decides to call. I think c-betting here is absolutely fine. I think c-betting is probably better than checking because there are going to be too many cards that completely ruin your confidence in the strength of your hand. So like any 10, jack, king, ace, spade significantly reduces your confidence in this hand. So I think betting here is absolutely fine. If it was a particularly passive opponent, I would worry or wonder about the hands that you actually get value from. If you're just trying to deny this guy the turn in the river, so an opportunity to realize his equity, then I think betting here is absolutely fine. But we definitely know that it's not a value bet. But if we are, so in this sense, we are betting almost to protect our hand. We don't want to see one of those scary cards come up on the turn. We're probably not getting value from anything worse. I guess 10 jack and spades would call. But even a hand like ace 10 of spades has significant equity against us at this point. So when we're making this kind of bet, I think I'd probably just fold to any resistance and any sort of aggression. The biggest thing for me to think about here is, let's say you shove here and you're right and he folds. Like you pick up 2,500 chips and your stack goes up to 8,600 chips. Okay, how does that affect your game moving further on in the tournament? Like winning that 2,500 chips now, is that going to boost your chances of winning this tournament significantly, or is it just going to pad your stack a little bit and obviously inflate your ego a little bit because you got him to fold here and you made a fantastic read? That would be my question here. In game, I think I'd just go ahead and fold here. Even against a hand like Jack 10, like he has, so he's got jacks and tens as outs. That's 6 outs plus 8 outs for the open-ended straight draw. That's 14 outs twice. So he's probably actually a favourite, or it's pretty close at that point. And then we can factor in the flush draws as well. So like I said, against a hand like ace 10 of spades, you're probably going to be you're actually going to be behind as well. I mean, let's just do a quick bit of analysis, just to make sure. We do have the 8 of spades, so that might factor in a tiny bit. Okay, so let's just look at this. If you haven't used this software before, let me just point this out. This is called Equilab, or Equilab, as I've heard some people call it as well. It's by pokerstrategy.com, great bit of software. You can get it for free, and it's great, and it works in Mac as well if you use something like Wine Bottler as well. So you can use it on a Mac or on Windows. Okay, let's evaluate. Okay, yeah. So like we thought, ace 10 of spades is actually going to be a little bit ahead. What about jack? Well, let's just go for any jack 10. Choosing to play it in this way. So it's pretty close. So let's, like you said, you thought, let's just have a look at this. You didn't think that he would call with a draw if you shove. I don't think many players are going to raise a draw here to fold. They probably should. But if he has a decent combo draw, like the 10 jack of spades or ace tennis, even with a decent nut flush, like the nut flush draw, I think you probably just go ahead and raise to get it in here. So I don't think you can rule that out. Sorry, let me just move this out so we can see. So ace 10 of spades, probably ace jack of spades as well. King jack of spades has the flush draw and a gut shot to go with it. And then we've got pocket nines and pocket fours and queen nine suited, I think, and maybe even queen nine off as value hands that you would choose to raise in this spot. And let's see how we're doing against that range. Okay, so against that range, we're really not doing well at all. So whilst I said earlier on that fold equity and hand equity are really, really important, you could go ahead and shove here. I think that he's going to continue with most of these hands. and actually probably get him to fold hands like Jack 10 offsuit that are not equity favourite against you. But all of these other hands are going to get it in with you, and at that point you're flipping. So I don't think it's a particularly good spot to jam here. I think you should just go ahead and fold. But I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on that, because obviously you've sent it in, and thank you so much for taking the time to send these hands in. Obviously, felt for a reason that this was going to be a good shove. But I think that I'd much sooner just protect my hand on this board with this particular hand. And I wouldn't think that I was overfolding in this spot either. So I wouldn't think that this guy could just exploit me by raising so much. Check raising a lot of the time on this board, because we're going to have a lot of hands that we can bet call in this spot as well. We also have hands that we could bet shove. So if we had the nut flush draw or 10 jack, those draws we could actually bet shove. So we're not going to be exploited in that kind of way by folding here. Mad Clown is saying, what if you had an overpair in this spot? So if you felt that he was on a draw but he wasn't going to call your shove, then you could just go ahead and call here, and the pot would then be about 31, 3200, and then you probably just look to get it in on the turn. But if you were scared of a spade, a king, or an 8 coming off, because there's the most obvious draws getting there, then you could just go ahead and shove in the first place. I mean, 2,500 chips is worth picking up at this point. It's almost a half of your stack. So with the overpair, I think it makes sense to go ahead and get it in. On a more dry board, I think you could probably just go ahead and call, and probably just cool down with the overpair. But if this player was particularly passive, then a one pair type hand might not even be particularly good. So it is going to be situation dependent and player specific and player dependent as well. So hopefully I've answered that question. I think we're up to about an hour on this first vodcast, episode 1 of the Sunday workout. So just before I wrap things up, let's think about next week. If you'd like to have a hand talked about on the vodcast, then please email it to gazelligpoker@gmail.com. Let me just get this back up so I can tell you all about it. Okay, so please email it to gazelligpoker@gmail.com. You can see that right at the bottom. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you're not following me on Twitter already, and it's @gazelligpoker. You add me on Skype as well, gazelligpoker, to chat through anything to do with poker in general, tournament poker specifically. And obviously, if you're already on Twitch, then you know that this is my channel on Twitch, but just in case, it's www.twitch.tv/gazelligpoker on there as well. So yeah, please send in some hands and any questions that you do have. I think we've covered quite a lot in this first episode, and I'd like this to be a regular thing that really builds over the next few weeks, and we continue every Sunday. So I hope you've had fun watching. I've had a lot of fun delivering it. And until next week, good luck at the tables and take care. See you later.